Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining me for this first session of Biblical Greek for our Languages of the Church group at St. Mary's. I'm pretty stoked to get started. I'll just give a little bit of background about myself and how I'm involved at St. Mary's, and also how I know ancient Greek and how I might be maybe credible to teach here this evening. So, my name is Halford. I am from Boise, Idaho. I grew up there, and then I moved down to Salt Lake City to go to the University of Utah, and I studied there for 4 years. I was originally going to be a business major, and then I kind of had a bit of a conversion to the Catholic Church during my sophomore year, and that was pretty life-changing, and it definitely changed my heart about where I wanted to go academically. And so I switched from business and then did a double major in English and history. And part of going to be an English and a history major meant that I had to take a language. I hadn't taken a language since high school Spanish, and I didn't like Spanish. I didn't want to return to that, so I'm like, okay, well, maybe I could actually choose a language that I would be interested in. And that was Greek. I originally wanted to do Latin, and then I wasn't really so fond of the teacher there. But then the Greek teacher was really, really awesome and just got me super excited in it. And then it was like this passion that took over. And that was just like, I was just studying it very intensely, and I really devoted a lot of time to it, and still do here and there, but obviously have a job here at St. Lawrence up in Heber City. And so there's a little bit less time than there used to be as a student. But so that's a little bit of a background on me. And I took ancient Greek at the University of Utah for 2 years, a little over 2 years. I studied during the summers and stuff for fun, because that was the type of guy I was. Not taking it for credit or anything, but I studied things. I studied Homer, Hesiod, Plato. We also did the Gospel of John over one summer as well. And so I got a lot of different, facets to my Greek knowledge. And I definitely, it's been a really big journey, and it's been a big passion of mine. And so I'm pretty excited about all of this.
Was Virgil Roman or Greek?
Virgil was Roman. Yeah, he was in the 1st century BC, I believe. And yeah, so, and it's very interesting because
Greek spoke Greek.
He may have, yes, and it's because Greek and Latin were sister languages,
right?
And so that's why I'm going to be teaching Latin as well next week, and because I haven't studied Latin too much, but obviously we'll be picking it up as I continue to teach. And if you know one of these languages, the other one is very easy to pick up, because they actually share a lot of the same words. For instance, like pater, meter, mater, those kind of things. So I gave every one of you a little bit of an introduction to the course. I kind of wrote my own, I kind of riffed on it a little bit of just my philosophy of, why would anyone want to learn a dead language, what I think languages are, and I just kind of wanted to lay out all of that. And I think the most central point to, my vision behind languages is that language and culture are deeply connected. And I think too often we approach languages, and foreign languages is just like, I input this and I get this back out, right? So I input, for instance, I use the example here of word, right? The word word in Greek might be logos, right? But then there's also other words. There's like epe, which means that'll refer to epic poetry. That's where we actually get that word from. It's not just oh, this is really epic poetry. No, it's actually coming from a Greek word meaning word itself. And so it's like seeing these distinctions and trying to enter into the culture that I see is really important. Of course, we don't have that culture easily accessible to us right now, because we live in the 21st century, and this language is 2,000 years old, over 2,000 years old. It began in 1200 BC is really when we can say that ancient Greek started probably becoming a thing, and then it wasn't written until 800 BC. And so there's a lot of history to this, and I think that's really important to try and encounter that, and to see like, okay, well, the word logos is going to have its uses in philosophy that come before it. Like in Plato and Aristotle, they're going to be using it in a very specific way. For instance, we have the word logic today that comes from logos, right? But it means word, it means argument, it means like rationale or something like that. You know, it's like it has all these various meanings. So then it's like when John says, "In archein ho logos," in the beginning was the word, what does he mean by the word? You know, what are all the thoughts he could be having about this? Because he's trying to describe who God is. And it's like, why does he pick that one word to describe that? So that's maybe something like that we could be thinking throughout this group and stuff. I think John is the most approachable for people starting to learn biblical Greek, and his epistles are very approachable as well. And so I definitely hope to take a closer look at those in the coming weeks as we get some of the foundational aspects of the language nailed down and stuff. So I also go over some materials as well. I'm using David Allen Black's textbook, it's called Learning to Read New Testament Greek. Because there's a lot, like there's not actually really any Catholic sources for like how to study Greek, I guess. The Protestants have been actually like way more involved with studying biblical Greek, which I think is also another reason why it's very important to me. Is like these are like the foundations of like the New Testament, right? And so it's like, I don't know. I thought that was really interesting that I couldn't really find a Greek reader, a grammar reader that was from like a Catholic perspective. But I think this one is actually probably the best one out there for people just getting into it. I really like his pedagogical approach because he starts out with verbs and then which quickly allows you to begin forming sentences in Greek. I also think it's important that at some point maybe you guys look into getting a Greek New Testament itself. I've recommended one here. There's also, if you ever happen to have access to some really good dictionaries, I mean, you can purchase the Little and Scott is a standard for ancient Greek, but then there's also the Theological Dictionary of the New Testament, which is this just giant dinosaur collection of every single word in the New Testament and its complete background in the ancient Greek language. So if you ever like have access to that in the library, it's definitely worth looking into, in my opinion. And then also, how will this course work? Because we're meeting once every 3 weeks in person. So that provides, I think, a bit of a challenge and a bit of a hurdle to overcome. So I'm going to try and have information out each week. I'm going to try and have a lecture out each week that they'll be a little bit shorter than these in-person ones, but I definitely want to continue to offer you guys more material as the course continues, because if we're not regularly practicing the language, if we're only practicing it once every 3 weeks, we're never going to retain it. So, and I think that's another central point to my philosophy is that this ultimately comes to be a thing of passion, right? And that has to be kindled somehow. Maybe like I kindle it in you guys, or you kindle it in yourself somehow. But it has to be this thing of teaching yourself, as of course I teach you guys simultaneously. But that was the case for me. Is like I had to go home and look at these, look at the words, look at the structures, and just really dive into it. And and you make some really interesting discoveries, and you encounter Scripture in a completely renewed way, in my opinion. So that's kind of an overall bird's eye view of the group, and I have like the schedule for the first 6 sessions, depending on. I just kind of want to see how things work over these first few sessions of this group, and then I'll probably give you guys another schedule at some point with where it'll continue to go. So I want to dive into. So I have lecture notes for you all. I'm not going to follow these 100% word for word, just reading off of them or anything, because I don't necessarily believe in teaching in that way of just reading straight out the script. But I definitely recommend that you guys read what I wrote at some point later on in more depth, and I'll definitely point some things out as we go along. But I wanted to give first a little bit of a background of ancient Greece, going all the way back to, I pinpointed here to 500. Obviously, it goes back to the Trojan War, which I hinted that number of 1200 BC, and that's kind of when like Greek civilization is beginning to form. But I provide everybody here a map from 500 BC of what Greece looked like, because what I want to do is just it's kind of like a little bit of a thought exercise. I'm not necessarily expecting that you guys can respond to it and stuff, but it's just something to think about when it comes to when you look at this map, when you look at Greece and where it's at, like what does it speak to you? And I ask some it's like what stands out to you about Greece's location? Like what might be the advantages and disadvantages of this? And how might geography affect the typical way of life for a Greek? I think these are all important because this is just one small factor of how language could be completely influenced. I state a little bit later on, like if you imagine the geography of this, of how there's so many little tiny islands that the Greeks have to go between, that there's probably going to be a lot of words that are associated with ships. There's going to be a lot of words that are associated with water, and describing the water, describing the conditions, and that definitely is the case. We have the word nautical, for instance, or like governor. The word governor is a really interesting word that actually comes from like gubernetes in Greek, which is like the governor of a ship. And we have so there's a lot of different words that we still like retain today from Greece's involvement with its own geography. And so this is an example of how like the culture is going to affect the language. They're going to need more words to distinguish in this way. And so it's like noting that whenever we're reading the New Testament, for instance, is that, why are the words being used that are being used? And especially, for instance, like logos, as I pointed earlier, when this is a part of a philosophical tradition in the Greek language, it's like, well, when you have Plato and Aristotle and Socrates, who are your predecessors in this language, it's like they're providing a lot of different distinctions in philosophy. So then it's that point of why are the evangelists, why are Mark, Luke, Matthew, and John choosing the words that they are choosing? Yes, and then I go on to say, like, yes, this is important for looking at the world of the first century, and looking at also like I list out a bunch of like key events and developments over Greece's history, and one of the most key ones that I list, it's towards the end, is Alexander the Great and his military campaigns, because Alexander the Great he conquered basically all the way to India, and he established settlements all around the Near East, and that was really important. It was called Hellenization. That was really important to like spreading the Greek language to the Near East, to where you have in Judea in the first century, in the time of Jesus, where everybody spoke Greek. And it's likely that Jesus very well spoke Greek, because it was the lingua franca of the Near East. And he likely spoke, and I think it's also a really interesting question. I don't know what you guys might think about it, but whenever Jesus is talking to Pontius Pilate, for instance, is he speaking Latin? I always find that a really interesting question, because it's like, or was he speaking Greek, or was he speaking Aramaic? This is a linguistically diverse area. I think it's always kind of important to keep that in mind of like what might have actually been said. Do you guys have any questions so far about any of this?
No.
Awesome. And I think, and I don't necessarily want to go into extreme detail about these historical events, but
Dev, can I ask you a really quick question?
Oh yeah, go ahead.
I don't know how familiar you are with the history, but would Jesus have been really familiar with Greek, or would it be similar to like somebody at St. Mary's who's not part of the Spanish community but is familiar with Spanish in order to converse with people, in a very rudimentary way?
That's a really good question. I think he would have been actually pretty familiar with it, and this is a point I left out, and I'm now I'm recalling that the Old Testament was translated into Greek, and that was the Septuagint. You'll see it often represented like this in scholarly work, LXX, the number 70.
You're saying the New Testament translated into Greek?
Oh no, Old Testament.
Yeah.
From Hebrew.
Because that's my understanding as well. Okay.
Absolutely,
I
yes.
misunderstood what you said.
And so, if the scriptures were translated into Greek, it's very likely that those would have been circulated just as much as the Hebrew versions of them. And there's oftentimes throughout the New Testament where the translations that the New Testament authors are using, like the evangelists or Paul, for instance, they're using the Septuagint version of the Old Testament.
Also, I think hardly, as far as I'm aware, hardly any Jews at the time of Jesus knew Hebrew. Only the really high up people who studied it very, very closely. Most Jews spoke Aramaic as their language.
Yes.
And so that's why I'm asking about the prevalence of Greek.
Oh yeah.
Specifically.
No, and it was very prevalent still. I mean obviously we have all the scriptures from the New Testament in Greek for a very specific reason. Even for instance, there's the theory that Matthew's gospel was written specifically to the Hebrews, right? And that it was originally written in Hebrew at one point, but eventually this gets translated in Greek in the Judean area, right? And and maybe it gets translated into Greek at further geographic locations outside of that. But I guess it's important to consider that Greek was very prevalent.
Well, kind of as a timetable, as a quick overview, I don't want to divert the course, but you're both here. Correct me, but kind of by 600 BC, Hebrew was really dying as a commonly spoken language and more used with the high priests and whatnot.
600 BC?
Help me with my timetables.
I don't think.
Okay, let's start from the beginning. We established in the last class, which I already had, I think commonly in the area of Jerusalem, Judea and whatnot, Aramaic forms of what was the most common language?
Aramaic, yeah.
Aramaic, right. And then Hellenization had taken place prior to the Romans.
Yes.
So Greek was spread through this whole region. Where does Latin fit?
As far as I know, not at all in Judea.
Okay.
That is an exclusive.
So for example, what would St. Paul have? What would his native tongue have been?
Greek. Right.
Well, he was a Roman too. He was a Roman
that's what I was
citizen.
going to say. Yeah.
So
he was not from Rome.
Exactly.
And so, correct me if I'm wrong. Maybe you know this better. Romans knew Greek in order to. That was sort of the language that encapsulated their entire territory, whereas Latin was specific for Italy and the city of Rome, and for the higher ups and the people who were really close to the business and all of that. But I don't know, maybe.
So in the western part of the Roman Empire, Latin would have been the lingua franca. It would have, because that's where we have Spanish, we have French. All of these are moments of Latin in becoming a part of those cultures and mixing with those languages, and that's why those change into the French we have today, because it's
we commonly call it Romance.
Yes, exactly. And those are on the western half, right? But you have the eastern half of the Roman Empire, and that eventually turns into the Byzantine Empire after the fall of Rome, and that's where that lingua franca over there is Greek, but that was a continuation of what was already existing beforehand, which was the fact that Greek was already widely spoken in the eastern half of the Roman Empire and the Near East.
So just one more thing at a time, because you had mentioned, like, at the time, someone was asking about in the last class about the dates of languages, and was Hebrew over the Greek, which it clearly is, like you mentioned, Abraham, that is spoken.
Yeah, I mean, that's the assumption. Yeah.
An assumption. When would Hebrew have, or did it not, start to commonly kind of die or to fade? At what?
I would assume.
Or Aramaic taking over and.
When was Alexander the Great?
He was around like the 300s. Yeah.
Okay, so that for sure caused a break in Hebrew, but I think there was also a loss of Hebrew and a renaissance of Hebrew around the time of the Babylonian Empire and the Babylonian exile, which was 200 years before Alexander the Great.
Right.
So multiple times in history, you have these moments when Hebrew dies out and then people try to bring it back in. So
Yeah.
this time right now with Greek, like it has died completely among the Jews at the time of Jesus. Aramaic has become their common language, their local language, but Greek is the language that that matters, right?
Yeah, I've been using term lingua franca. This is what English is today in the whole world, and this is essentially what Greek was. I mean, Latin to an extent, and Aramaic to an extent as well in the Near East. These languages would have all been like merged together. It would be a situation like in Europe today where you often have to know several languages, like if you're in Switzerland, right?
Mm-hmm.
And where it's like French, German, Swiss, and so yeah, it's definitely that situation, and to I guess keep all that in mind. Also, there's like 7 books that we have from the Old Testament that we don't have any Hebrew manuscripts for. The only ones we have are Greek, which was partially the rationale for Martin Luther not actually retaining those and removing those because they weren't, I guess, like original or something.
Same thing with the Jews don't accept those because they're not originally in Hebrew, they were
exactly.
Greek.
And like Jesus he quotes from Sirach, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like he's quoting from these sources that were only in Greek, or at least that we know.
Weren't there like 6 books, I think?
7.
Maccabees, yeah.
7, and then there's like little excerpts from other books, like the Book of Daniel. They don't accept little excerpts from those.
Yeah. So I guess answering your question as a whole, it's like Greek was quite popular, and there's a lot of historical evidence to suggest that it had been popular in the region for quite a while leading up to Jesus' time, and it was also quite popular even afterwards as well.
I'm sorry for this, because you brought up like Pilate. Would he theoretically or hypothetically spoken Aramaic, Greek, and possibly Latin?
Oh yeah, I mean it's
all 3.
Because he would have been educated as like a Roman citizen.
So
right?
he quite possibly, most likely spoke all 3 languages.
Yes.
Okay.
And when you have like Paul going to Rome,
right,
like Paul is probably speaking Latin, right? So it's like these guys, they're linguists. They know their languages, I guess, in the end, and so it's like,
okay.
And also in the Passion of the Christ, I paid attention to it because Pontius Pilate asked, "Quides veritas?" like to Jesus, and Jesus' response in Latin. So at least in Mel Gibson's eyes.
So I was just reading about this. That moment, it's not in English, so you don't know what language they're speaking. When Jesus responds in Latin, Pilate is kind of taken aback, like physically, and you see that. And then from that moment forward, their conversation is in Latin. I think that was just
It's a really interesting point because like Jesus is obviously not going to violate his human nature, right? So it's like he's not going to necessarily just insert a language into his brain or something, and he's going to learn it through natural experience. But I think all the evidence is there to suggest that these languages were circulating around enough to where he would have known Aramaic, Greek, and Latin.
Okay.
I don't doubt it. So, okay, let's actually jump into some Greek here. We're going to dive into the alphabet, the most basic component of a language. Actually, the word alphabet is Greek itself. Alpha, beta. the first two letters. So, yeah. I include a little bit of like a history of the ancient Greek languages, or of the ancient Greek language, of like how basically all examples that we have of writing that survive, or like in inscriptions, we don't necessarily have the original papyrus manuscripts, but as you can see, like on the picture of the Rosetta Stone that I have here, ancient Greek didn't have spaces. Like they didn't really have a concept of spaces in between words. Actually, everything was done through conjunctions in terms of like starting and ending new sentences and clauses and stuff. So they had just like a pretty intuitive understanding of that, and they didn't have punctuation either, which is something I think pretty interesting to note. And so whenever you do read ancient Greek nowadays, you actually do have punctuation, you have accents, you have spaces in between words. So the way we're reading it today is not quite how they would have been reading it back then, because obviously they knew the language, they knew how to read it and stuff, but we have a lot of aids nowadays in order to help our reading of Greek. And all right, so I include a table on, I think it's the 5th page here, of all the letters of the Greek alphabet. And this is from David Allen Black's book. So it's in it's in the excerpt from the textbook that I've provided for you all. And yes, he includes uppercase, lowercase English, and the pronunciation. I don't quite agree with his pronunciation of everything, but the thing about ancient Greek is we don't know how it was 100% pronounced, because we, of course, do not hear a native speaker nowadays, but he's using what's known as the Erasmian pronunciation, and that comes from Desiderius Erasmus, who was a guy in like the 14th and 15th century who developed the system. And he was like a very important scholar, but there's a lot of discussion amongst like the classicists nowadays and the scholars that his pronunciation probably isn't the best, but it's pretty consistent. So I'll largely be following that. How we will do this is I'll just write it up on the board, and we'll just kind of practice it, I guess, because it always needs practice. So the first letter is alpha, and then the next one is beta. And I'll pronounce it kind of how they would have pronounced it as well, but in general, in class, I will just pronounce it like in English. I'll just say beta or alpha. Beta, we have gamma, we have delta, we have zeta, eta, theta, that, iota, kappa, lambda. If you've taken math classes, you might be
Or
a little scared. You might be a little scared right now. Lambda, and then mu, or mu. Yeah, so the upsilon is a very interesting pronunciation. You have mu, then you have mu, just like that. Then we have a very cool one here, C. That. And if you need tips on how to write some of these letters, please ask and I will teach you. C, and then we have omicron, which means little o, micro o. And then we have P, or pi. We have rho. We have sigma. there's three versions of sigma. This one only occurs at the end of words. And then, yeah, this is lowercase, that one's uppercase. We have thou. We have ypsilon, or ypsilon. Yeah, that's how it would be. It looks like that. So the sound for it is really interesting. You'll hear in modern Greek pronunciation today, this gets turned into an E sound. It's completely changed into an E sound because the actual sound of it in ancient Greek was E, which is like if you
Combined U and E.
Yeah, kind of like U and E. The way to do it is you kind of stick your lips out, and then you do like an E sound, so like E. It's like that. If you want to do that, you can also just go like oo, like kind of an oo sound if you want to, if that's easier. And then we have E, ki. This one during the Koine period would have been pronounced ki. Would have been like a sound like that, but you can do either. You can do ki or ki.
How do we know that these words dropped out? Like I know we philosophize that like Indo-European, these words that like drop out get easier, but like,
Sure.
I mean, I'm just curious how we know native speakers.
How they know,
I
how
mean,
they can like reconstruct the pronunciation
Yeah.
and stuff. Yeah, so they can, they're pretty good about doing that nowadays and stuff. They'll like compare the language. So for instance, like in Latin, you have super or super, I guess, if you wanted to be more correct about it. In Greek, this would be hyper, hyper.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the same. It's just typically when there's an oo sound at the beginning of it, Greek will do a h, and then Latin will do a s. And so they can compare things like this. For instance, we have it in English too. We have father, and then pater, like that in Greek. Right, and so it's like the and then the pa.
Yeah.
Those distinguishings there, and so they can like trace these things back. There's apparently like certain laws as to how languages will change over time in terms of their pronunciation, and it tends to be a thing where vowels converge to similar sounds over time. So that's why actually in Greek these, and modern Greek nowadays more specifically, these ones all sound the same. Eta, iota, and upsilon all sound the same. And so yeah, they've all kind of converged. They have distinctive sounds in Koine Greek and especially in older forms of Greek. Okay, and then actually I'm missing a couple more letters here. We have C. That looks like a little trident. And then we have omega. That. And so there's 24 letters in ancient Greek. And yeah, so it's a little bit simpler than English, I guess, in that way. But they also look a little bit crazy. It can get pretty hard to read them sometimes. That was one of the biggest things in my classes, is that students always had a difficulty pronouncing the language because it takes a lot of practice. You just have to sit with it and just really hammer it down. But then once you can do it, you can just be reading it pretty fluently. Okay, so shall we practice a little bit? Okay, so just I guess repeat it after me. I guess so. We have alpha.
Alpha.
Alpha. We have beta.
Beta.
Gamma.
Gamma.
Delta.
Delta.
Zeta.
Zeta.
Eta.
Eta.
Theta.
Theta.
Iota.
Iota.
Kappa.
Kappa.
Lambda.
Lambda.
Mu.
Mu.
Nu.
Mu.
Xi.
Xi.
Omicron. so it's actually technically, if you spell out the letter, it'll look like that. And this is a heavy breathing mark here, which is something I'll introduce later on, but this makes it an H sound at the beginning. So it'll be like a ro, like that.
Is that like is there like a breathiness there, or are you rolling your R?
There's
like
both.
like you know how in Brazilian Portuguese they pronounce their R as almost like an H.
Yeah, that's exactly the same thing.
So
Yes.
it'd be like whole.
Well, it wouldn't be. That sounds pretty French to me. When you go like
That's kind of
how they do it.
like Brazilian Portuguese.
Sure.
So
It's gonna be a thing of like hra, like a hra, and like you're rolling your R as you're like.
Or like beach is prime, more or less, in Portuguese.
I just know that they pronounce
It is.
their R's like
It is.
French H's or something.
Yeah. Portuguese is a trip.
And like you'll have for instance, why do we have like such weird spellings as with like that? The RH is because there's always a heavy breathing mark on ros at the beginning of words. Never like if they're in the middle of a word, for instance, kurios, which means Lord. You would never have like a rough breathing mark or anything like that. But yeah, this is where we get the Kyrie. That would be in a specific case for that. So, okay. And then I think right here. Oh yeah. So,
Ro,
sigma,
sigma,
tau,
tau,
ypsilon,
ypsilon,
phi,
phi,
chi,
chi,
or chi.
chi,
There you go. Psi,
psi,
omega.
omega.
Okay, that's good. And then let's do it where we just pronounce the letter, and we'll try and go at a decent pace with it too. A, be,
De,
ga,
ge,
da,
de,
z,
z,
e, th,
the,
i, ka,
ka,
la,
le,
ma,
na,
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 x, o,
o,
pa,
pa,
r,
r,
s, i,
i,
o.
o.
Yes. And so one thing you might notice as well is that these sound kind of similar, but one's omicron, so little o, and one's omega, or big O. And so and what happens here is that this vowel is twice the length of this vowel. And so that's something you do want to pay attention to when you're reading, to try and do as best as possible when there's that distinction there. Also, eta and I missed the letter actually. We have epsilon here. My bad, guys. So we have the little e. So epsilon, little e, and then the eta is the big E. It's the longer form of it. So this would be like and this would be a, like that. My Greek teachers were always notorious for forgetting to write things on the board too. So now I feel their pain. I'm experiencing the same thing. But yeah, so you might be asking about long or short vowels, since there are short, long here. You might be asking about these other vowels here and whether they're short or long. They can be both. It's very hard to actually determine whether it's short or long unless you actually read ancient Greek poetry and can determine it by its position in the meter. We're not going to be doing that. So actually, you can just kind of pronounce it somewhere in between, and I think that would be fine in terms of the vowel length. So, any questions on the alphabet so far? And I guess like one thing that you guys could work on, this week with the alphabet as you're learning it and stuff is to be able to say it maybe as fast as you can, the alphabet in English. So being able to like alphabet gamma delta epsilon zeta eta theta iota kappa lambda mu nu xi omicron pi rho sigma tau upsilon phi chi psi omega. Something like that. Or just at least to like try and work up to it over time. Okay. I think this thing's still recording. Okay, sweet. Now, if you flip the page from the main alphabet table, we have, so I've gone over a little bit about vowels here. I'm going to talk a little bit more about them because often the vowels do not just appear on their own, but they will be smushed together with another vowel. But yeah, diphthong, I think I wrote on here, it literally means, so D or die means two, and then thong, that's a really hard word to pronounce, but thong means sound, so two sounds. And yes, that's describing the fact that two vowels are being smushed together there. So I'll write them down and kind of do something similar as I have done with the main alphabet here. Kind of treat this as a part of the alphabet because these are distinct sounds. One thing to note about them is that they're always long, except there's a couple of exceptions because Greek always has to have a couple of exceptions, but I don't think you guys will have to worry about those exceptions really at all because it's particular to a specific tense in Greek, and it doesn't necessarily affect the way that you will read it or understand it. Okay. And yeah, definitely feel free. I think I wrote in here at one point to write on the lecture notes. That's why I print them out and stuff, so that like while you're following along, you can interact with it on the page and stuff. Okay. So I like his pronunciation for just about all of them, but this one is a little bit different, I think. But you can still pronounce it his way as long as you keep it consistent. But this one's an alpha and an iota combined together, and it produces the sound of I. And then we have epsilon and then iota, and that sounds like A under David Allen Black's pronunciation. It's actually shown that by the 2nd century, or even earlier, actually maybe even in the BCs, that A was being pronounced E, so actually the same as iota here. And that's part of it, that's another example of vowels converging in sounds. And then we have oi, we have we, the French we, yes. We have ow, we have el, we have oo. Okay, let's practice them here, I guess. So we have I, A, or E, oi, we, ow, el, oo. I, A, E, and then oi, and we, ow, el, and oo, like that. And I'm planning on also with the kind of the weekly sort of dissemination of information, of lectures, of lecture notes, and I'm also going to be like kind of adding exercises where I'll record things. So for instance, I will like record the alphabet and have it like on an MP3 file so that you can play it at home and like just repeat after me, so that you can practice on like really getting the sound right. and also for these as well. I'll do that for vocabulary too. So I'll just simply say a word and then wait 5 seconds for you to like practice the word and also like translate it on the spot too. So that definitely helps with like having that auditory like recall there. Because I think that's another pedagogical thing, is that I think it's important to be able to like possess the language and like to own it in some ways, where it's like I can recall this at a moment's notice. And so yeah, look forward to that in the future. But in terms of the alphabet, that's about everything that there is. There is a couple other things. Well, actually, maybe this might be the only other thing. We'll see. They always kind of pop up. But this might be a pretty familiar word to everybody. The pronunciation for this is angelos, angel, or messenger, more specifically. So the two gammas together produces an ng sound, so ng, so angelos, like that. And then, yeah, you'll see like two lambdas there. Usually what you would do for that is angelos, like you'll kind of hold it on the L a little bit longer if you can, but if they kind of just smash together into like an angelos. Like
But the diphthongs aren't letters, they're combined.
yes, they're vowels that have been combined, because all of these here are vowels.
Well, that's what I was going to get to. With
Yes.
the first part of the alphabet,
Mhm.
24,
24 letters, yes.
This is just my thinking. I'm wondering, are some of them considered consonants and some considered vowels?
That's
are they
good.
all kind? Because it almost seems like those are consonants and the diphthongs are vowels, but I don't know.
So there are 7 vowels
Okay.
in Greek. So alpha, epsilon, eta, iota, omicron, upsilon, and then omega.
So very similar to English.
Those are yes. These are basically like this is
They're very different from Hebrew, where there are no vowels.
Okay, right.
That's true. That's always kind of scary to me. I wonder about that, like how
Yeah.
you actually pronounce it. But yeah, I mean, like these are like kind of the English equivalents. Like A, E. This is also E,
And then
I.
the diphthongs are just the combination of two vowels together that make a different sort of sound.
Yes, yeah, slightly different sound. Or for instance, like in this one, it makes the same sound as iota, depending on which pronunciation you wish to choose. But then yes, all the rest of these are consonants. Grammaticians or I don't know how you would say it, but they'll always kind of fight over it and say like, well, for instance, this is an aspirate or whatever, like that would be like the specific way to distinguish this consonant as opposed to others, because it's like th, like you're exhaling like air out of it. And actually in older forms of Greek, this would have been pronounced th, like that instead of a th. But I think since we have like the English word the, it's much easier to pronounce. And when they're speaking biblical Greek, Koine Greek, they're using th, not th. Like that's really hard to do.
Well, then what was the difference between tau, which is more of an aspiration?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. And we have those in English too. For instance, like the word pot, like pa.
Yeah.
That's actually how phi would have been pronounced, like a pa.
Yeah.
But then it goes to like a fa, because it's just a lot easier, regular spoke, yeah, like that. So, but we don't necessarily distinguish those as easily in English. We just have to hear it for the first time and then we repeat it, sort of thing. So, and then some consonants, and this is important. This kind of comes up, are combinations. So like C here is a kappa and a sigma smashed together, essentially. A zeta is a delta and a sigma smashed together, if that makes sense. This would have actually been pronounced, actually I think it's sorry, my bad. It's a sigma and a delta smashed together. So it would have been Siddha back in like Homeric Greek, but by the time of Koine Greek, they were pronouncing it as za sound, because it just kind of simplified the sound there. This one's also another combined one here. It's going to be P and sigma, so pa, sa, ps, like that. Let me see if there's no others there. So those are the only ones that are combination consonants. Everything good? Sweet. Okay. And let's see what time it is here. Okay. We can try and, I don't know if I want to necessarily go over accent marks quite yet. I might do that in next week's little lecture that I'll send out, and we'll send it out through Blocknote and stuff, so it'll be available to you guys that way. But we can practice pronouncing some of these words here on the back, and just this will be your first introduction to your first Greek words and their vocabulary definition that's next to them. But you'll see how they he specifically chose these words because they all carry over into English in one way or another. Okay, so let's do the first one here. So that one will be Apostolos. Apostolos. So you see that the accent over the omicron. That's the third syllable from the end. They call that the antepenult. That's not a word you need to worry about right now, but know that wherever the accent is, that's where you want to place the stress on it. You might be wondering what the little thing over the alpha is out front. That's a soft breathe or a smooth breathing mark. It doesn't really serve any purpose. Just say it as normal. But I guess the whole idea is to distinguish it from a heavy breathing mark, which would be a h sound rather than just the vowel itself. And so yeah, Apostolos, and then that's an apostle. So that's a pretty easy one. It specifically means somebody who's sent out. I'm sure you've heard that at one point in the life of faith from various sources. But yeah, one who is sent out, sent forth even. Then we have soma. And that means body. It's not what Jesus uses for "this is my body." He'll use sarx, which means flesh, more specifically, rather than like body as a whole, I guess. Okay, and then we have phone. So notice how the accent's on the very end of the word, so you have to make sure to put the stress on the end like that. Then we have cardia. Good. Yeah, that means heart, cardiac. Yes. Then phobos. Phobia or fear. Yes. And then genos. You'll see forms of this word a lot, especially the verb form of it. Anytime you, like Genesis, right? Like you'll see gen. Anytime you see that, it's usually referring to like a beginning or birth, or for instance, in this case, a race or like a people, I guess you could say. Then we have Philippos. So the Philip, the name specifically means friend of horses, because you have phil, like philia, or like a friend, and then hippos, which is horse. The word hippopotamus is river horse. See how much Greek we have in English? Isn't it awesome?
A Philly.
Oh yes. Then we have exodos, which means departure. It literally means like the way out. So the hodos, the way out, and the way from. And Yeah, let's do it one more time. Exodus.
Exodus.
And then we have Zoe.
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 Perfect. And that's life. There is another word for life in Greek. It's bios, like biology is where we get that for. Jesus, whenever he tends to use Zoe more often than bios. I actually don't even know of an instance that he does say bios. So when he's saying like I'm the way, the truth, and the life, he's using Zoe. Hey Zoe. We have Petros.
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 That's an interesting one, especially when Jesus says, like, you are Peter, and upon this rock I shall found my church. Because when Jesus uses the word rock, he uses Petra, but the word for rock in Greek is lithos, I'm trying to think of we have like an English word for that, like it's escaping my brain, but essentially, I think that's a really interesting point of like the evangelists retained the word like Petra in there when they could have used the Greek word lithos instead.
Any speculation why Christ would have made that choice?
Because it would have been, it's, in its most essential definition, it's a pun, right? But it's specific, it's a pun, right? But it's also like specifically geared towards saying like, Peter, you are the rock in that way. Because Petros or Petra would have been rock in Latin. And so he was just carrying that over into
I've also heard
Greek
that
as well.
Petra is feminine, which is why Jesus doesn't say, you are Petra, and upon this Petra I will build my church. He says, you are Petros, the masculine, and upon this Petra I will build my church.
Yeah, I would have to look at it. I can't remember if it's feminine or masculine in the Greek, but I think he's definitely, obviously, the fact that like that word is still retained says a lot about the fact that he didn't use lithos.
Is that the same Petra that is in the city? Any connection or
Well, yeah, because it's carved out of rock.
Probably, yeah.
That's where the name originates, but from the Latin, I
It's
think.
carved out.
Yeah.
Yes. And then we have theos.
Theos.
And theology, right? Like that's where we get that from, or Theotokos, the God bearer. And when I was saying, I think I said enarchein hologos kai hologos ein proston theon, kai hologos ein theos. So that's where it appears in the first line of John there. And then we have gune. Yes, that means woman. That's the word that Jesus used to refer to Mary at the wedding at Cana. And actually, it had many more meanings. It was a much more linguistically rich term, or idiomatically rich, where it could mean like madame. It could mean something very polite. This is something, as opposed to something very rude. Like in English, if we're like, woman, do this for me, do X for me. It's like, well, that's quite rude.
I was reading a book though, a 15th century book by Mary of Agreda, where she had this vision of Mary, and Mary said that because she wanted to suffer quickly with her son, she asked him to take away consolations, which is why Jesus is using distant language and using woman and not mother.
Yes.
Which I thought was interesting, and I was always like, Jesus is being rude.
Yeah.
It's like,
and that's
this mystical relationship going on between the two of them.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
that's totally like that's the point of encountering like scripture in the original language, is that if we just simply look at scripture through like an English perspective, we're gonna just project English understandings onto it like that. So it's like of course we're gonna think that that's pretty rude of Jesus to do, and then we wouldn't actually be like ascertaining what we should be from scripture there. Then we have pater. Yeah, I put the accent on the wrong syllable and said pater, but yeah, it is pater. It's on the last syllable there. And then psuke.
Suke.
Psuke.
Suke.
Yeah, unlike in English where we don't pronounce the ps sound, we actually do that in Greek there. Psuke has it can mean life as well as soul. There's numerous instances where it's used to mean life in the New Testament. It can also mean butterfly, because there was this understanding that butterflies were souls. I mean, this was kind of more of ancient Greek sort of thoughts about the world and stuff. But I thought that was a really interesting thing I found in the dictionary when I was looking at this word. So then we have polis.
Police.
Polis.
Police.
And political, police, all of the above, politician. Those aren't the meanings; those were just the English where we get it from. But yeah, it means city. And then Christos.
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 This means somebody who was anointed, somebody who has oil on their forehead, who has been anointed in that way. So yes. And we're at an hour. We're in an hour right now?
Yeah.
Okay. We could even try practice. I think we should try reading the beginning of the Gospel of John that David Allen Black, he includes it at the end of this chapter, and maybe we can try and work through it here. Not necessarily translating it, just practice reading it. Okay. So in,
In.
and arche,
Arche.
in arche,
In arche.
ein, ho,
Ho.
logos.
Logos.
In arche, ein, ho, logos.
In arche. In hologos.
In arche, ein, ho, logos.
In arche. In hologos.
Careful about it's a smooth breathing over the eta and ain there. So it wouldn't be hain. That would I think there's so many instances where if you change it from a heavy breathing to a smooth breathing, it changes the word completely. Or if you have a different accent over it, it's a different word. For instance, a, and then a. This one means if. This one means you are. So yes, the accents and stuff and the breathing marks and all that are pretty important and stuff. So in arche ein hologos.
In arche. In hologos.
Hologos, good. That sounds pretty good. And then kai,
Kai.
ho,
Ho.
logos,
Logos.
ein,
Ein.
pros,
Pros.
ton,
Ton.
theon.
Theon.
Okay. Then kai ho logos,
Kai hologos.
ein pros ton,
In proston.
theon.
Theon.
Okay, we'll try that whole clause there. Kai ho logos, ein pros ton theon.
Kai hologos. In proston. Theon.
Sounds great. You guys are killing it. Then kai,
Kai.
theos,
Theos.
ein,
Ein.
ho,
Ho.
logos.
Logos.
Kai theos,
Kai theos.
ein, ho logos.
Ein hologos.
Okay, and then kai theos, ein, ho logos.
Kai theos. Ein hologos.
Great. Do I want to try the whole first line? That would be the first line of John. Do you want to give it a shot, Anthony?
We'll see. Is the first one N or is that
That's an epsilon, so it'd be an eh sound. So
Eh.
n or yeah.
N.
Yeah.
and arche,
Mm-hmm.
en ho logos, kai ho logos en prostotheon, kai theos en ho logos.
That's great. Dude, you're natural. Either of you want to give it a shot?
I can't do that.
You can go as slow as you like. I'll help you through every bit of the process. Okay. So we'll keep going through. I just want to expose you guys to all of it, and then and definitely like obviously.
So this, I know, but just translate in English real quick.
Oh, sure.
Beginning.
Oh yes, so there are some interesting words there and stuff. Okay, so in that, okay, so in the beginning, so if we like Latinize that first or that second word there, arche, we see arc in there, which carries over in like archaeology or like archangel, right? Like there's a few of those, right? Yes, archetype, that's perfect, yeah. And so arc, it has like about 10 different definitions, so it's definitely one that's really hard to pin down, and it's one that still puzzles scholars here of like, does John actually mean the beginning? It can mean like the principle, right? It can mean like kingdom. Actually, it has like the image of a kingdom. Like an archon is like a ruler. That's how Satan is described in John like 15 through 17 in Jesus's prayer to the disciples, like the ruler of this world, the archon of this cosmos. Actually, the word for world is cosmos in Greek, which is very interesting. I'm sure I will get into that at some point with you guys. So in arche, so in the beginning, or in principle, or in the kingdom, ein was ho logos, was the word. So there's that ho there is the. That's the definite article, more specifically. And then kai ho logos, so and the word. So notice ho logos, and then ho logos is repeated there again. So and the word, ein. What does ein mean? Was, yes. And then pros ton theon. So pros means, again, it has like about 10 different definitions, but in this case it's meaning like it's like the word is towards, it's like kind of pointed at, but being that it's in the beginning, it's going to be associated with like nearness or being with. It's like the word was with God. And notice how it's ton theon instead of, so the basic form of theos, we learn theos, right? It looks like this. It looks like that there because that preposition, pros, changes theos. It changes it into theon, into a specific case, which I will cover that. I think on the schedule I have that for the next time we meet in person, actually. That we'll kind of go over how the nouns change depending on certain circumstances, their function in the sentence. So, and the word was with God, or near God, at God, by God. And then
What's tone?
Tone? Tone is the. So there's actually 24 ways to say the in
So
Greek.
it's like saying like capital G God.
Yes. So it's actually the God.
Yeah.
The function of the definite article is like actually to make it definite and to like it's more of pointing specifically at like it is the God, right? He was with the God. And then, but it's interesting where it's like kai theos, like he doesn't use the definite article there. There's a lot of, again, scholarly like debate on why that happens. And it's kind of one of those things where the Greeks will just use the in certain instances and they just don't in others. But sometimes it doesn't necessarily change the meaning.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of complicated. I'm sure we'll go over that at some point. And so kai theos, so and God, ain was ho logos, and God was the Word, which is a different ordering than we usually receive in English. We usually hear the Word was God. It is interesting, the word order here in Greek, like, and God was the Word.
Do you know why they do that?
Well, word order is quite flexible in Greek. It's way more flexible than in English. But I think here, I mean, like, he puts it before logos.
But it
I
makes
think
more
it's-
sense if it was literally translated like this, because it sounds like, and the Word was with God and the Word was God, just sounds like redundant and kind of like awkward. If
Yeah.
it said, and the Word was with God and God was the Word, it's kind of juxtaposing the two. So
Yeah.
I don't know.
It potentially provides slightly different meaning too, in terms of like the emphasis of it. It's like, it's more of like a linking together, and God was the Word. And I think it's like providing like a higher degree of emphasis on like God being the Word rather than like the Word being God, which I think is, this is why we read it in the, I guess in the original context again here, and because like even word order still does matter in Greek, even though it's way more flexible, and this would be an instance where I think word order is actually quite important, because this is arguably the most important line of John's Gospel. And it's like to think that he probably didn't think it through a little bit before he wrote it down as to what he wanted people to hear it as. I think that's something to consider, I guess. It's like we should always like recognize that these words would have been just as shocking to the hearer, like to the ancient Greek ear, just as it should be just as shocking to us today to hear it, like not only in its original language but also in our own language too, because these would have been very foreign concepts to be equating God with the Word, whatever the Word is, and it's like John goes on to then show who the Word is. Like the Word is a person. The Word became flesh, became sarx.
Well, the Word, I think, is being introduced in a new concept, isn't it?
Yes.
Here.
Yes.
And then being tied to a concept from the beginning of time.
Yes.
No matter what deity, which is God.
Absolutely.
And then then the Word is being now advancing, being defined in a way that humans hadn't thought about.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this is like purely from the revelation of God that John is able to do this, and it's like, I think this is the first time logos has ever been used in this way. And it's like this is like a very important moment. Of course, there are many moments in the New Testament where things are being used in a completely new way, because this is revelation. Like Paul actually invents several Greek words to be able to describe what he's trying to describe. Where when he says, where sin abounds, grace abounds all the more, he actually creates a new Greek word for abounds all the more. It hyperabounds. And I think that stuff is so interesting when that happens.
That's not hyperdulia, is it?
Hyperdulia. I don't know if it is or not.
Okay.
Or like when Jesus says the Our Father, it's translated as daily bread, but he says like super substantial.
That's such an interesting word.
So, is it that Uber?
It's actually epiousia.
Oh, epiousios, that's right.
Epiousia. Yep. And I really would love to talk about that because it means this means like above, and this means being. Like so, and being is like slightly different than substance.
And that's it's awful to translate that as daily.
Oh yeah, I don't know.
It just completely misses all of that.
So it's above being bread.
Like
Yes.
Our above being bread, like that it's
gives our bread that is just like beyond.
It's beyond us, yes. Which I mean, like daily. See, that's the thing is, this word was never used in the Greek language prior to the New Testament. So it's like we don't know how to translate it, in some ways. It's like, well, the only thing we really have to base off of it is Jerome's translation of it, like with the Vulgate, which is why Latin also, throwing in a pitch for my class next week here, is also very important because of the Vulgate translation actually helps us to understand many words in the New Testament that were never used before, or have only been used a couple times in the history of the Greek language.
But Paul was making up new words or new expressions.
Oh yeah.
It's like a combination.
Shakespeare Greek, is what they say.
Well, because just personally, maybe it's a shortcoming or maybe it's just odd. I stumble around reading Paul.
Mm-hmm.
He's difficult for me personally to read.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times he'll say these things or they seem to contradict, or it's another topic, but maybe it has to do with it's just difficult to translate a language when he's inventing new aspects of the language.
Yes, that's it reminds me of when one of my Greek teachers said that somebody asked him about Paul, like, what do you think of Paul, and reading him in the original Greek, he's like, you can't read Paul, it's impossible. And I kind of agree with him at some points, because it's like Paul just goes on and on and on. He just subordinate clause after subordinate clause, like the sentence never ends. And then it's like, yes, he's inventing new words. He's using words in like different ways than the evangelists in the Gospels. Sometimes, it's like, so trying to kind of reconcile like how he's going about things. Like for instance, what is it? Episkopos, like bishop. Right?
Yet he's writing to a very common man in his letters.
Yes.
He's not writing.
It's common, but it would also be shocking to the ear, I think. It's like as
we
the Gospels
hear the words so often, not only like in Mass, but if we're reading the Bible, that it kind of we're desensitized not only to its like newness, but also to like its philosophical profundity. I guess.
Oh yeah.
Like this is before Paul. This had never been a thing, and yet it pops up, and you're like, oh wow. And if you grow up hearing these things, it just kind of becomes moot. And
oh yeah. Like imagine being like the first person to hear like one of Paul's letters read aloud, and like hearing it for the first time, like how shocking that would be. Or the Gospel of John, how shocking it would be to hear these opening lines. I don't even know, it would probably be like pretty otherworldly.
Was Paul an orator by training?
He probably would have, because he went to school in Tarsus, and that was a pretty solid education.
He was also a Pharisee, wasn't he?
He was a Pharisee, yes.
So he would have studied a lot.
Yes.
Not just
in Tarsus, because he was definitely educated in Latin.
He's studying rhetoric and trying to portray the scriptures.
Oh yeah.
In a way that would get people not to understand it, but to be convinced of them.
Yeah.
But at the same time, on top of that, I should say, as he says for himself, and we believe it, the Holy Spirit speaking through him.
Oh yeah.
So this isn't just him. It's coming out in these new ways.
It's also in the Bible, and anything in the Bible is considered to be inspired by the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit that desired those words to be specific.
From Alpha to Omega.
Yeah, and so to have that, to have that complexity in his letters and that newness is that God wanted us to hear it that way, apparently.
Yeah, I think that's always been something that's just been an interesting, I guess, sort of prayer for me in general over the past couple of years as I've studied Greek, is that God enters into the messiness of human language. Right? Isn't that like fascinating? Like he could have invented a new language that maybe we all would understand perfectly, or something like that. He could have revealed himself in other ways to us. But like we have we're trying to translate a language that's 2,000 years old, trying to understand the meaning of it. And it's like God was like willing to do that, to like enter into like humanity for that. To have us receive him maybe in like a human way, but also to like receive like divine to know who he is.
Yeah, have you ever seen that movie Arrival with the aliens? So there's this movie Arrival where this alien species comes to Earth and teaches the scientists, this linguist, their language. And this language, but once you understand it, it starts to unlock like areas in your brain to where you can sort of transcend space and time.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, God really wanted us to understand him completely. He would do that. He would teach us this alien language that allowed us to transcend space and time and unlock these things. But instead, he comes into our languages, which are extremely limited, and starts connecting all the dots. It's pretty fascinating.
And that just makes me think also that when Christ spoke himself, there were various reasons, but and a lot of times he was trying to get ensnared by the scribes and Pharisees, but he usually gave what might seem indirect answers, but maybe I'm trying to think.
It was always for a specific reason.
No, of course.
And that's something that's something that I've noticed is that like if Jesus is human, he's using human things, but he's not using them frivolously.
Right.
So like he's never going to speak in hyperbole. And so when it seems like he's speaking in hyperbole or exaggeration, he's actually not. He's saying something so much more profound and deep than that. And to sort of wave it off as
I didn't come here to save the world. I came here to
set
on fire. Or brother against.
Right.
Tomorrow's gospel is going to be, you have to hate your mother and father in order to follow me.
Yeah.
And you're like, well, yeah, we can sort of like shoo that away as like, he's just exaggerating so that people can be like, oh, what is this guy saying? But no, there's something there that he wanted us to get out of that. So.
Oh yeah. Well, and it's kind of that thing where when you're a kid sometimes and like somebody says like I hate you, like you can kind of say like I hate you or something like in a laughing way, or a lighthearted way or something, or like I hate that, and so it's like it kind of desensitizes the word of like hate, right? Whereas like maybe in the
Gospels. This is something I wanted to bring up. I actually was looking into that word today, and in the Greek, the word that he uses for hate, that seems to be like very specific. There's no other way to translate that.
Like is it me? Because like misogyny.
I think so.
Yeah.
And it's just like very clearly that he means you can't like go back to the original. So this is the purpose why I like the languages of the church group. Is like I want to be able to go back to the original language and see if there was a mistranslation or an improper translation. It doesn't seem to be the case there. It's like no, he literally meant, at least in the gospel, he literally meant hate. So it's like, okay, now I have to wrestle with this theologically. What does he mean by this?
I think maybe parents of an old religion that's not letting you follow him, the truth, like you have to cast that off.
Exactly.
Yeah. Right, I think gospel last Sunday, he cares for no man, but it really means the Greek, he cares for no man's opinion. Like, these English translations where it's like kind of got to scratch a little bit to really contextualize it.
Good points. Yeah. I think this is awesome.
I just think Christ was so often, he didn't just say, look, on this day I'm going to be arrested on this. So often he's like, turn your brains on and think. I'm not going to just spell this out for you on the chalkboard.
Well, he explains it to some people, like
he says
explicitly, but for most people, he's just like, you've got to figure this out for yourself.
And I think he does that with the disciples. He says, this is the way I spoke to the crowds, but here alone.
Yeah, exactly.
In one instance, and I think it goes beyond that.
Yeah.
Well, he says specifically with the Pharisees, he starts speaking more in parables because he's like, you're not worthy, like I spoke to you plainly before, and now, because like you've been so envious and jealous, like I'm not going to speak clearly to you anymore.
Well, they're trying to ensnare him. You're asking questions you know the answer to.
Yeah.
You're just trying to get me to. You're
Yes,
asking me
just,
a question. I think we get it. Yeah, like I'm not going there. I know exactly what you're trying to get me to say.
Right.
And
So I'm excited about the Greek.
Okay.
Yeah, that's it just reminds me of where sometimes Catholics bring it up where John uses the word "nah" instead of to like eat or something whenever in John 6.
That's what I thought. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we had this conversation.
We'll have the conversation at some point when we actually get to the level of understanding to be able to for me to explain to you guys like, what's actually going on there. But sadly, he's not using a different word most likely. But.
Yeah.
Okay, well,